From sunrise to sunset, recycling is more than a job. It's a way of life. Early mornings, late nights, hard work that turns the old into something new. Recyclers power the economy, and ReMatter is built to power you. Making those long days easier with smarter tools like scale ticketing, payments, dispatch, and everything in between. We bring it all together so you can focus on what matters most, growing your business and serving your community. Driven by the spirit of recyclers everywhere. ReMatter. Built for recycling. Built for you.
Now, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Curtis Dubay. Curtis is the chief economist of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, of which ReMA is a proud member, where he tracks the condition of the economy, analyzes the impact of public policy on economic growth, and runs the Chamber's Chief Economists Committee. This committee helps the Chamber formulate economic policies and provides analysis to policymakers in Washington, D.C. Curtis brings a wealth of experience to his role. Previously, he served in senior roles for the American Bankers Association, the Heritage Foundation, PricewaterhouseCoopers House, and the Tax Foundation. Curtis is a frequent commentator in the media, appearing on CNBC, Fox Business, Fox News, and C-SPAN. He has testified before Congress and has been cited in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, US Today, and Politico. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Curtis Dubay.
Thank you, that was very nice. Well, good morning. I'm so sorry. My yellow tuxedo and top hat are in the cleaners. That's the bad news. The good news is I won't have you doing any stretching or singing karaoke. I actually did the same event as him last week, and I got to go first. That is a much fairer order of speaking for an economist. Excuse me for 1 second before I start. This is important in this day and age. Have to check social media and the news to make sure everything I'm about to say is still applicable and nothing has changed to make it inoperable. I think we're okay for now. Okay, so everyone wants to know, will we or won't we? Will we or won't we have a recession? And my answer to that is maybe. I don't have a better answer than that. You want that one-handed economist, right? Have to give an answer. Well, I can't do that right now. I can't do that right now because the environment has changed so much in just the last few weeks. There wasn't any question about having a recession late February, even early March, and maybe even into April. But now it is a possibility. It is a possibility because of the turmoil and the chaos that has come from tariffs. So and the reason I say maybe about a recession is that it is impossible to predict what is going to happen with any certainty, because there's no precedent for what's going on today. There's no way to forecast, estimate, predict, because you need some historical analog to do any of those things. We have none. Whether you're forecasting the weather or forecasting the economy, you have to have something to base it off of. We don't have that today. We've never had a situation where we had an economy, like the US economy, one that is as big and dynamic and as strong as it was just a few weeks ago, be thrown into chaos with something like tariffs. So no one can predict with any certainty what is going to happen. The best we can say is that the economy is growing slower today than it was just a few weeks ago, and that is because of tariffs. Tariffs have raised prices for businesses, they've raised them for consumers, they've created an uncertainty, and that has an economic toll. What we know right now, to put some numbers on it, is that middle of the first quarter, so say like mid-February, maybe actually let's say into early March, the economy was growing, forecast to grow, at 2.5%. We got the first quarter numbers a few weeks ago. It contracted at 0.3%. That 2.8% differential is the cost of tariffs. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that the second quarter is tracking a bit better. Right now, it's on track to grow about almost 2%. We are now halfway through the second quarter, so this is we're holding up pretty well. By the way, I should have mentioned, the slide deck's available for everyone, so please, we'll make sure to pass it around. All the slides are annotated with extra data and analysis, and we'll distribute that. It's open access, free for everyone to have. So again, back to the original question of, are we going to have a recession? Well, a recession has a definition. It is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. We've had the 1, but these things get revised. Very easily, you can see this revised to being positive, and we're growing at almost 2% here in the second quarter. So it doesn't look like we're going to have a recession here. If we were going to have one, it would be more likely to be in the second half of the year. So it's a possibility, but I don't think it's here yet. We would have grown for the year around 2.5%. Which is above what most people think the US economy can grow at. The long-term growth potential, based on our population growth and the amount of capital we have in the economy, is generally estimated to be 2%. We grew at almost 3% in 2023 and 2024. We're going to grow close to that in 2025 as well. That's been revised down. The Fed now has it as 1.7%. Again, tariffs have exacted a toll. So the economy was growing really, really well, and it would have continued to do so had it not been for the tariffs, because this is something that's important to remember. Economies don't turn around on a dime. They're like a great big aircraft carrier. Right? They don't, to change their trajectory, something big has to happen. And the question right now is, are the tariffs big enough to do that? And we just simply don't have the answer to that yet. But they could, which is why this is so much of a concern. Despite all this, the US is still the envy of the world when it comes to our economy. Other countries, even developed ones, would love to have our growth rate, love to have our unemployment rate, love to have our inflation and interest rates. I get asked a lot, how long will the US remain the global reserve currency? And my answer to that is only for the rest of my lifetime, my kids' lifetimes, your kids' lifetimes, their kids' lifetimes. It's going to remain the global reserve currency as long as anyone can see, because no other country has the economy we have, the big dynamic economy we have, really deep liquid financial markets, a very established legal system to adjudicate disputes, and all evidence to the contrary, a very stable political system. So we're going to be the reserve currency for forever. Interesting developments in the financial markets over the last couple of weeks, where we had the stock market falling. Usually when that happens, the US dollar will rise and interest rates will go down because there's a flight to safety. Those things did not happen. The US dollar went down, stock market went down, the US dollar went down, and interest rates went up. There was a flight from the US. That is temporary. We'll go right back to normal once the turmoil from tariffs is over. Okay, so I told you the economy was doing pretty well, had been doing well for a couple years. It leads to the question of, well, how is that the case? Because there really was this perception for several years that the economy wasn't doing so well. And I'd have to point out again and again that the economy is doing well, was doing well, and it leads to, people want to know, how is this the case? And the answer is that US consumers have been spending at an incredible clip month after month after month, going back years now, going all the way back to COVID. Look at the light blue bars. They go up month after month after month. And that's above inflation. Each and every one of those months is above the rate of inflation. So this is not inflation-driven. This is consumers spending more and more each and every month. There was a bit of a dip, I think, in January, but they've rebounded and came right back. Okay, so we know that consumers are driving growth, but it leads to another question. Well, how are they doing this? And the answer is that in the United States of America today, if you want a job, you can have one. There are 109,000 more job openings than there are unemployed workers to fill them. Now, that used to be a couple million more. We've come way down. But that we're even in a situation where they're even close is a historical anomaly. There used to be way more unemployed workers than job openings. That's why we cared so much about the unemployment rate. We still do, and we cared so much about that monthly jobs report, because there weren't enough jobs in the economy. That's flipped on its head right now. There are more available jobs than there are workers to fill them. So if you're a consumer, you want to go out and spend, you can go out and get a job. They are plentiful, and it pays really well. Wage growth has averaged 4% for a couple years now. I think going back to, it's been a while, it's been a couple years. Yeah, middle of 2023. So 2 years now, wage growth has been, it's been surpassing inflation. The dark blue lines have been above the light blue line. But annual wage growth has been above, or right around 4% for a real long time. See how flat that dark blue line is? So if you want a job, you can go out and get one, and it pays really well. Now, the caveat here is that in total, prices have risen more than wages since inflation kicked off in March of 2021. They're about equal at this point, but inflation is still running slightly ahead of where wages are. But for the last 2 years, workers have been coming out ahead. The other way that people perceive that consumers are driving spending is through credit cards. Now, there's no doubt that we spent our credit card balances way, way up in the aftermath of COVID because we spent them down enormously during COVID. Those balances have been spent back up. Those who most need their credit cards to spend above what they otherwise would have spent have probably exhausted that resource. This looks a little scary. People get a little nervous when you see credit card debt rising at that rate. Not a systemic problem yet. Credit card debt remains, as a percentage of income, well below its historical average. Defaults have ticked up a little bit, but not to that concerning of a level, about back where they were pre-COVID. Auto defaults have gone up above where they were pre-COVID. That, I think, has largely to do with the price of used cars, price of cars in general. People had a really hard time getting cars during COVID. They probably overpaid for a car that they needed. They're probably still overpaying, and then interest rates have gone up, and you could see an understandable rise in defaults. Something to keep an eye on, nothing that's that too concerning yet. So this situation where consumers drive economic growth can continue. I call it a virtuous cycle. So businesses hire workers because they're short of workers. They pay them well. Consumers go out and spend and drive up demand. Businesses hire more workers to keep up with the higher demand. This has been what's driving the economy for a couple years now. It is sustainable, but there's one key data point that makes it sustainable. And before I get to that, it will continue as long as businesses need to continue hiring workers. And they will need to continue to hire workers because we are going to be short of workers for the rest of our lifetimes. We have an aging population. Older people work less than younger people. I don't think that's too much of a controversial statement. The population is growing. We have a growing population, but the average age is rising. And when you have that, you get fewer people working. That's all this chart shows. That if we had the same labor force participation rate that we had when COVID kicked off, we'd have almost 2 million more workers in the economy. So we're short those 2 million workers because we have that aging population. This comes because we haven't had enough children. What you want in a population distribution is you want each generation to be bigger than the one before it. If we start here in the US with the baby boomers, biggest generation at that point, it kind of starts the problem because the next generation, Generation X, was smaller than the baby boomers. Now the millennial generation is bigger than Generation X and bigger than baby boomers, but not by that much. And then the next 2 succeeding generations are smaller than the millennial generation. That makes a really big problem. So you want if you were diagramming it, you'd want it to look like an inverse pyramid. It looks more like the kids' game Jenga, right? Out, in, and it's teetering. Can't support the labor force at the rate we need it. There's only 2 ways to fix a population issue like that. One is to have more children. That's not probably going to happen anytime soon. Fertility rates have been falling since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We have 200 and something years of that now. It's not going to turn around really quickly. Even if it did, it takes a long time for a child to enter the workforce. And the other way is with immigration, and clearly we're not going to have higher levels of immigration anytime soon. So we are going to be short of workers. What that means for businesses, what it means for all of you, is that you're going to likely continue to hoard workers. You'll keep workers on when you otherwise wouldn't have, when things take a dip. We're seeing that in the data right now. We don't see big layoffs. We see businesses keeping their workers. Maybe they're not having as many job openings like I showed before. Maybe they're not backfilling positions, but they're not laying off because they saw how hard it was to operate during COVID with too few workers, and they don't want to end up back in that situation again. So the need for workers what can help that virtuous cycle continue to go, but the data point that I was alluding to, the one that keeps the lubricant that keeps that wheel spinning is labor productivity. This is probably it's the most important chart we're going to see today. Growing productivity in an economy is a sign of a dynamic, expanding economy. We have it in the US. That dark blue line has been strongly positive for a long time now. And businesses can continue to hire workers and pay them well as long as that dark blue line exceeds that light blue line, as long as their productivity, what they're producing for those businesses, exceeds the cost to those businesses. And it has been doing that for a couple years now. This is a US phenomenon. This is not a global phenomenon. The Fed, their central bank is called the European Central Bank. The head of that, ours is the Fed, Chair Powell. The head of that, theirs is named Christine Lagarde. And she said a few weeks ago that in post-COVID, productivity in the Eurozone has grown 0.6%. In the US, it has grown 6%. The US is outpacing the other most developed countries in the world tenfold when it comes to productivity. That's a really, really good sign. And again, it can help keep that virtuous cycle moving. Of course, that leaves the question of where is all this productivity growth coming from? No one has the silver bullet answer. No one knows exactly what it is. I have a few ideas. I think a lot of it comes from workers moving into higher level or more productive positions with more value add. And they're doing that in two ways. One is that a lot of people reskilled during COVID, couldn't work, so they took that time to gain new skills, and they're now working at a more productive position. And a lot of businesses, I usually get the response from businesses when I say this, that they're hiring workers they wouldn't have hired before. They might have required that a worker coming into their business have 90 to 95% of the skills for the open position. Now they'll take 65%. Show up on time, come in every day, we'll hire you and we'll keep you on staff. Regardless, that person's doing a more productive job than they would have been doing prior to COVID. The other is big dividends from automation and mechanization. And I have a story that kind of ties this all together. And it's a very simple one, but I think it really drives home the point. So I'm from Connecticut, I'm from New England, and I was up in outside of outside of Boston at an event, and it was a Great Wolf Lodge. So this chamber was having an event at the Great Wolf Lodge, and it was a cold spring morning. It was spring break in New England, and if anybody has been or from the area or has been up there, we don't do Starbucks, we do Dunkin'. And so there's a Dunkin' in the lobby of the Great Wolf Lodge, and I come down in the morning and to go do the event to the ballroom, and everyone in that lobby, all the kids, all the adults, have their coffee, their drinks, their donuts, and their breakfast sandwiches. Now, usually a Dunkin' with serving that many people, 4 or 5 people working behind the counter, I think there were 2 people filling all those orders. They're able to do that because you could order the Dunkin' from your room. There was a QR code on the mirror, and there were kiosks in front of the counter where you could order, and you could still order from your phone from your Dunkin' app. And there was definitely something going on in back that's helping them fill all those orders. Now think about this. So those 2 workers are doing the job of, say, 4 workers. Dunkin' can pay those 2 workers more than they were paying them before because they're 200% more productive, or 100% more productive. And those other workers, we were fearful that they'd be out of work. Pre-COVID, it's like, what are we going to do with these people who are going to be replaced by automation and mechanization? Well, we're not really fearful about that because they're at work right now doing something that's more productive. That's just a Dunkin' Donuts. That process is playing out all around the country, all around the economy with much more complicated things. So we're getting a huge dividend from automation and mechanization. You'll notice the thing I didn't mention was AI. This surge in productivity kicked off before the introduction of AI. We haven't seen the major benefits from AI yet. That's to come. That's why I was so optimistic about 2025 being a really good year. Thought we'd see lower inflation, lower interest rates, a boost from AI, and we'd be off and running for the foreseeable future. That estimation's come down a little bit, but I'm still optimistic because not only will AI make us more productive, and I think this is the real key thing about AI. Yeah, it's going to make us all more productive. and that's going to drive productivity, it's going to drive growth. But it's also a real thing. It's an investment in a real economy, stuff that people understand. To create AI, you need a giant warehouse. You need to build a giant warehouse. You need to put lots of things in the warehouse, and you need lots of electricity. These are all things that have to be manufactured, have to be made, have to be maintained. There's a lot of investment that goes into AI. It's not just kind of this amorphous technology thing. It's something that's real and people can see and will have really big benefits for people up and down, all different types of jobs. So I'm really, really optimistic about AI and what we'll do going forward. I've only got a few minutes left, and I haven't even gotten to inflation yet. But I do want to say that, real quick, optimistic for the future. Growth might be a little slower this year than it would have been otherwise. We're in a situation now, you heard the term stagflation. I think some of you here probably were around in the 1970s when we had a major bout of stagflation. Stagflation is inflation higher than the rate of economic growth. There's a possibility that growth will slow below the rate of inflation. Inflation is going to be over 2% for the next year or so. Growth might come in under 2%. It's a mini stagflation. It won't be great, but it's nothing like we would have experienced in the 1970s. But I still think the underlying strength is really good. If we can get past the tariffs, I think we'll be in a really, really good position. For your industry, there's going to be a little bit of a lull here as we go through whatever we're going through here in the next, whatever you call this. But again, I do think that things will get better, hopefully later in the year. And then we do have a very kind of optimistic, we do have a potential for very strong growth going into the future because of all the things, productivity, AI, all the things that I touched on. But we haven't talked about inflation, which remains the elephant in the room. It remains a problem. Now, we got new data yesterday. I think inflation came down to 2.3% on an annual basis. I didn't get a chance to update this. We're getting there. We're not quite there yet. The Fed itself says that we're not going to be down to 2% until 2027. So still a year and a half before we're down to the Fed. That's their target, 2%. So we still have a couple of years before we get there. This is the measure that gets all the attention. It's not the measure the Fed looks at. The Fed looks at this. This is called core PCE, strips out volatile elements like food and energy. This is still much higher than the Fed's target, so it's still at 2.8%. This is why it's probably going to be another year and a half before we get down to the Fed's target. Inflation is going to remain in the front of people's minds for a couple of reasons. One is it's hitting necessities now. Back a couple of years ago when it really took off, when it hit that peak, it was hitting things you could opt out of. Travel, leisure and accommodation. You don't have to go on the vacation. You didn't have to pay the exorbitant prices for hotel rooms, rental houses, rental cars, flights. You can't opt out of food, housing, energy. And that's a thing that are really hitting right now and putting inflation in the forefront of people's minds. I think the accumulation of inflation really matters as well. And that's probably why people don't feel like inflation's gotten better. I'm going to use a prop. I'm going to use my family's grocery bill from last week. So I've got 3 boys at home. They are 13, 11, and 8. Prior to COVID, now they were younger, they ate a little bit less, but prior to COVID, our grocery bill was $225 to $250 a week. Last week, my wife spent at the grocery store $465.60. That's week after week after week. Yeah, so people are going to be upset about inflation. And here's the thing, that's never going down. Inflation doesn't end with prices falling. I want the $225 basket of groceries back. You all want that back, but that is not how inflation ends. Inflation ends with prices rising at a slower rate. So instead of going from $465 to $485 to $495, it'll go $465, $467, $468, $469. That is a very unsatisfying answer. That's not what anybody wants. We want to see prices go back to where they were before. But we don't want deflation. We don't want prices falling. Deflation is probably more disruptive than inflation. Because think about it from your perspective. If all of a sudden your customers start saying, we're not going to pay you as much for your products and services, your workers aren't going to take lower prices, your suppliers aren't going to take lower, or your workers aren't going to take lower wages, your suppliers aren't going to take lower prices, and all of a sudden you're in a real bind. So deflation is bad. That's why the Fed is targeting a lower rate of inflation, but it's a really unsatisfying answer, and it's not something that anybody wants to hear. But that's how it will end, and it'll take us a couple years to adjust to a new higher price level. For any of those who go out to lunch regularly, so this is another quick story. My wife works for the federal government, works for the Department of Health and Human Services, and they have to go back 5 days a week now to work. And she had been going back a while before, but she goes up to lunch and said, "Hey, you won't believe what I paid for lunch today." I said, "You went to Potbelly and got a sandwich and a drink, and it was $16. And she said, "How do you know that?" Well, I've been at work for 2 years, 3 years now, and that's just what it cost. Before COVID, that it was sandwich, chips, and drink, $10. Now it's sandwich and chips or sandwich and drink in $16, sometimes higher. Everyone wants that pre-COVID price back, but it's not coming back. It takes a while for people to adjust to that much higher price level. So what does this mean for the Fed? They're not going to raise rates anymore. They stopped doing that. They started cutting rates. They cut a full percentage point on the federal funds rate at the end of 2024. They were supposed to cut rates 4 times this year. That's been downgraded to 2 times. They're going to be in a holding pattern for a while. The tariffs have really thrown a wrench into their plans, a lot of uncertainty. Inflation is on the right track for them, so I anticipate they're going to hold for a while. I usually take them at their word, though. If they say two rate cuts this year, they can still get those in. They meet in November and December. They can still get those in before the end of the year, but they're going to be in a holding pattern for a while. Okay, so I've come to the end, and I usually go through a bunch of risks to all the things I've said today. You know them. There's geopolitical risks. All the things that are on the global stage can always throw the economy into turmoil. We have domestic political risk. We have the tariffs. We have kind of the chaotic nature in the White House for a couple, 3 more years. There's a huge tax cliff that's coming. Some of you might be paying close attention to that. They're debating that right now. This Congress has to pass a budget and raise the debt limit for at some point before August now, I think, is what the Treasury Department has said. These are all things that are really hard for the Congress to do. And then I didn't say anything about our national debt. It's way too high, and it's not coming down anytime before 2029. That's just the way it is. So unfortunately, that will remain a risk for the foreseeable future as well. Let me just wrap up by saying you as business owners should be thinking about what are you going to do with your workforce? How are you going to make ends meet being short on workers? What are you going to do with automation? How are you going to invest in automation and mechanization? How are you going to invest in AI? Because that's really how you're going to have to make ends meet. But wrapping things up, I'm optimistic for the long-term prospects of the U.S. economy. Usually, when you've had all the things thrown at an economy like we've had really since COVID, you see big. If there are weaknesses in the economy, things will be exposed. That hasn't happened, so that tells me the underlying strength of the U.S. economy remains really, really good. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.